I've been asked to talk about today is about some just challenges and some learnings from our journey into AWS and our journey with Checkpoint in regards to moving over to the public cloud. Here we go. So who knows who Xero are? Anybody? Oh, well, yeah, I know you do, and I know you guys do. So I thought I'd better quickly just tell you who Xero are, because Xero is a global small business platform. We connect our customers, which are small businesses, to the right numbers anytime, anywhere, on any device. So our customers are small businesses. And we have 1.2 million subscribers using the Xero platform, which is pretty astonishing and amazing for me, because that is just a massive number that actually talks to how impactful our application is to small businesses around the globe. And when I talk about around the globe, we have 1,800 staff here, not here, in Singapore, New Zealand, the UK, the US, Australia. Did I miss anywhere? I don't think so. But it also means that when we've designed our Checkpoint infrastructure, we've had to take into account that regional aspect in regards to where those staff are coming from to get into our environments. But the most important number we actually like to look at is 1.4 trillion, and that's 1.4 trillion New Zealand dollars, of course, so not the same as Thai baht, but $1.4 trillion, which is the amount of transactions that were processed through the Xero platform in the last 12 months. So that's small businesses sending invoices to other companies, which is quite astonishing as well. So what we did was we migrated our entire infrastructure over to the AWS public cloud. That migration finished, I think, in November 2017, so late last year. It took about 3 years, so I joined Xero at the start of that migration. It took about 3 years to migrate our infrastructure over to AWS, and as part of that migration, we moved over 4,500 servers from our on-premise infrastructure over to AWS, and we migrated about 1.4 petabytes of data. But as part of that, we actually had to redesign our security architecture for the public cloud. And when we did that, we started thinking about what our key goals were. And goals were very important for that migration. So we had our sort of standard goals that were the business goals of the migration, but we came up with security goals as well. And those security goals were really to ensure that our security architecture met compliance requirements, and then obviously to ensure that we had no breaches or accidental information disclosures, of course. So those were our goals, but our really most important security goal is one that I came up with myself, which was to build an automated security system that allowed our developers to actually interact and engage with the security components, so that these guys, some of these guys here that are from my team, didn't actually have to do the operational support for the security infrastructure. But really, it's about moving to an environment where we can support our next wave of growth and accelerate our adoption of this new public cloud platform. So it's about moving from the left-hand side of this screen to the right-hand side. So it took us weeks to build infrastructure previously, and now we want to move over to milliseconds. So that means moving from on-premise infrastructure through to using Amazon's EC2 infrastructure, through to now using containers and serverless computing. And I would say that if you as security professionals are not starting to think about how you can best secure containers and serverless computing, that is something you should really focus on when you go back to your workplaces, because that is the big challenge for us at the moment. So Xero is a really agile environment, and as you can see, I have to keep looking down here actually, as you can see, we grew quite quickly inside our AWS environment. So when we sat down and did our plan for Amazon Web Services, I think we planned to have 6 accounts initially. So 6 seems like a pretty reasonable number. We thought we could deploy into a really realistically contained environment. And I think at last count, we've got over 90 AWS accounts in the environment, which is quite massive, but you can see that our adoption of both those accounts and the services from AWS was quite agile and rapid. But thankfully, it's sort of tailoring off a little bit at the moment, which is great. But it was really driven by the whole concept of using product-based teams, which for us was a real challenge. It was a challenge because the product teams could actually choose the tools, processes, technologies that they wanted to actually use inside AWS. And as a security team, sure, we had checkpoint infrastructure to secure that environment, but we needed to make sure that those product teams understood and were educated regarding the benefits of that infrastructure. So that's something from the keynote this morning was, I think it was the CIO of Checkpoint was talking about his people, processes, and technology sort of principles, I suppose, and one of those principles was education. And for us, it was the same, that agile growth meant those teams could really do what they wanted inside AWS, but it was our job as security professionals to teach those developers, DevOps resources, and architects why securing their environment was very important. So I wanted to talk about a couple of challenges, because we had plenty, and Damon was talking about the fact that we had success, but with success, before success was failure, I suppose. And I can say that you've got to fail before you succeed. And we had a number of challenges, and I thought I would just list out 3 key challenges, which was configuration drift. So AWS, I think Damon was talking about the fact that it's quite a dynamic and exciting environment, but it's really, to me, a double-edged sword. You can do great stuff in Amazon Web Services, but at the same time, configuration sprawl and growth is really one of your enemies. So for us, we needed to take stock of how our configuration looked and deploy infrastructure quite quickly to manage that configuration. So what that meant was that we started to actually use our checkpoint systems as code, and we started to actually use products like Amazon's CloudFormation, etc., to store the checkpoint configuration as software, I suppose, and start to actually track the state of that checkpoint environment, just like we would do with normal code for the Zero application stack. The second big challenge for us was context, and when I think about context, it's really about the fact that we have many, many technologies of which Checkpoint is one inside our environment, and we now are struggling with the concept of how to blend and build a context or a plane of visibility across all of those technologies. So for our Checkpoint environment, we've been working on some great concepts and innovations around integrating our perimeter checkpoint systems with our host-based security infrastructure. So we have host-based security systems doing software vulnerability assessment, configuration state monitoring, etc., across 4,500, 5,000 servers, and we're working on signaling information from those hosts to our perimeter checkpoint systems. And that's going to give us many, many benefits around isolation and encapsulation and faster response time to threats and vulnerabilities as they occur. But in the same way, using some of the power of CloudGuard, I suppose, I was going to say vSEC, using the power of CloudGuard, we want to integrate our Amazon Web Services environment with the vSEC controller so that we can see both Amazon security state and the checkpoint firewall state from one panel, which is fantastic. But that will then give us more context in terms of the security profile of the environment. The other thing is speed, the speed of innovation, because for us as a security team, we were always seen as blockers in the environment, and because the product teams are so agile, we needed to turn ourselves as a security team from a blocker to an enabler. But that also meant that we needed to work with Checkpoint to turn them into a security enabler as well. So for me personally, that means that we engaged with Checkpoint at many, many levels, from our account managers to SEs, but more importantly, quite closely with R&D, so that we actually had regular meetings with R&D and feedback loops to be able to actually try and build up a pace of innovation. And then the last big challenge for us was shared responsibility. So does anyone know what the Amazon shared responsibility model is? Not you two. Nobody? Well, I've got a whole slide on that later, so that's quite handy. So shared responsibility is really, really important in the public cloud because it's what defines how you as a customer should operate inside the public cloud. And I know that there's one for Microsoft and there's also one for Amazon, of course. But shared responsibility is something that we found quite challenging to start with because that shared responsibility stretched inside our organisation amongst both security and non-security people, but also to our partners, and that's, I just used the word partners, right? So that's about the fact that with shared responsibility, you change your vendors to your security partners, and that's a real mindset change. They're not your adversaries, they're your partners. So, my favourite slide, it's the key principles for security engineering. So I think they talked about some key principles this morning in the keynote. Well, these are my key principles, and I suggest you all write them down and tattoo them somewhere because they're really, really important. These key principles are about how we decided to operate inside the AWS public cloud environment. And so for us, the first key principle was about having repeatable and automated build and management of security systems. So that meant that we didn't use the UI and we tried not to use the console. It meant that we used continuous integration, continuous deployment systems to actually deploy our environments in a repeatable and automated fashion. It meant that we actually had to talk to Checkpoint and spend quite a lot of time during the ramp-up phase of our migration project, many, many hours and many, many late nights, in fact, to work out how to get these, I think they were R7730 appliances, deployed in a repeatable and automated, maybe R7720 actually. Anyway, so just make sure repeatable and automated is something you think about when you move into the public cloud. The next thing is what I was talking about, speed, or a principle of operating at accelerated pace. Because the way you need to think about these things is you're not competing against a competitor of Checkpoint's. What you and Checkpoint were competing against is the rest of your business or Amazon itself. And what I would sort of explain there is that if my team has a request to make some sort of security change or develop some sort of security-related system, it was really important that they got onto that change quite quickly and they reacted and responded really quickly. Why? Because we've got a lot of smart product developers inside our organisation, and those developers would just find another way to do it themselves. They would try and work around our security solutions. So to be responsive was critically important. But also, the fact is that Amazon releases thousands and thousands of new products and thousands of features every year. I think there was one figure of like 1,400 new products alone. Maybe that was 2 years ago. 1,400 is quite a lot, right? That's because they release and they release and they release frequently. So it meant that as a team, Checkpoint and Xero security team were actually competing against Amazon. We needed to come up with solutions faster than Amazon did themselves or faster than our product teams could. And then the other thing is obviously a principle of having on-demand security. So everyone knows all about these new licensing models, which are quite on-demand, pay-as-you-go, usage-based models, which is great. But on-demand security for us was about the fact that when you move into the public cloud, you pay by the hour, or you pay for what you need. And for us, as a SaaS provider ourselves, we've got those 1.2 million subscribers, but they aren't all logged on to our platform at the same time. There's peaks and troughs. So we didn't want to actually have 24 Checkpoint gateways running in one region at all times. We wanted those Checkpoint gateways to be able to scale up and scale down as needed. So that's where utilising systems and technologies like Amazon's auto-scaling and elastic-type computing, coupled with core-based licensing models, is quite important. But the real challenge there is to actually ensure that you've got the Checkpoint backing and technology in terms of features available to correctly manage that core-based licensing model without having issues. And I've got plenty of stories around that if anyone wants to ask them later. So, shared responsibility. This is a very standard AWS slide, but I thought I'd put it up here because, I want to say it again. If you don't know what the Amazon shared responsibility model is, and you're a security professional, and you're thinking of moving into a public cloud environment such as Amazon, you should become familiar with that. Not only from the perspective that it is something that you will rely on for compliance programs and ensuring that you get through SOC 2 audits and all that sort of thing, but it is the best way of understanding the way you should operate inside AWS. But for us at Xero, there's a new paradigm of shared responsibility. And I've got a great slide here. It looks nice and fancy, but it's got 3 logos, and that's the important thing. Amazon talk about shared responsibility between Amazon and the customer. We talk about shared responsibility between Xero, our security partners, such as Checkpoint, and Amazon themselves. And we like to take that even further, as one of our architects pointed out to me a week or so ago, is that even inside Xero, there's a shared responsibility between our product teams and our security team. So that shared responsibility between Xero, Checkpoint, and Amazon essentially means that if all three organizations are not working towards a common goal and working as a single unified face, we're not going to be able to deliver to our customers or to our internal stakeholders. So you need to define the points inside your environment that shared responsibility will operate. That's critically important. But for us, it really meant that when we were ramping up this project and we were deploying our Checkpoint gateways, when we sent out messaging to our organization about building firewalls, building proxies, building other pieces of infrastructure, whether that messaging came from our partners, came from Checkpoint themselves, or came from myself or my team, it was one single message. So, what about our architecture? So, my favorite thing to talk about is the Threat Protection Zone, the TPZ. It's an awesome, I'll have to say it, it's an awesome design principle. So I always like to talk about the TPZ, but essentially, what is the TPZ? It's simply a defense in depth architecture. It's essentially an environment where we have a principle that all ingress and egress traffic into our or out of our 4,500 servers must pass through a TPZ to be able to actually access the internet. You know, Amazon's best, their best practice principles essentially state that you should put defense in depth type systems in place, and you should focus on securing your systems. So in terms of a layered defense strategy, it's about these four things: system security, data security, network security, and monitoring. And in terms of focusing on securing your systems, it means that in terms of an Amazon design principle, you should work with your partners like Checkpoint to focus on your systems and let Amazon focus on the infrastructure around you. But going back to the principle of layering, for us, network security is the one that we wanted to talk about today, because network security is where Checkpoint really helps us build our defense in-depth infrastructure. Checkpoint allows us to deliver on our principles of encrypting everything in transit, and then also the principle of building isolation and encapsulation across our environments. And how do we do that? We've deployed hundreds of Checkpoint gateways across multiple AWS regions. So we talked about earlier having 90 AWS accounts. 90 AWS accounts equates to hundreds of virtual private VPCs. It's hundreds of VPCs, so that's hundreds of small networks that will transit through one of 5 threat protection zones to get out to the internet. And what does that look like? It looks like this wonderful diagram that I drew, which my network engineer says is terrible. But anyway, this diagram basically shows us how our internet and application proxying solution works at Xero. Essentially, it shows that how downstream servers in some of our product networks like global, accounting, practice, and banking must pass through clusters of CloudGuard systems that are located in one of these 5 TPZs. It essentially means that for a system in the Xero global network to access the internet, it must pass through these Checkpoint CloudGuard systems where it's subject to IPS, application URL filtering, etc. But it also means from both that north-south and east-west protection that if a service call is made between our Xero Global and Xero Accounting networks, we actually pass that traffic, not directly between those networks, we pass it through our TPZ, thereby isolating traffic between those environments and protecting those product teams from themselves. Another great use case for our checkpoints, I'm sorry, I really used the word great in a poor grammar because SFTP is not the favorite thing I like to talk about. But for us, SFTP is not really a cloud-friendly protocol. It's something that is very, very important to Xero because we have a bank feed service. The bank feed service actually allows our customers to import their bank statements into our application. But how it really works is banks SFTP that bank statement information down to our back-end servers. But because we have a principle of all connectivity must go through a TPZ, we needed to deploy Checkpoint CloudGuard gateways into our TPZ environment to essentially broker that SFTP traffic in and out of these banking environments, as you can see there. So it's a great example. It met our requirements of being able to actually securely transit the traffic, but also met our requirement in terms of not allowing our zero banking team direct access to the internet. So it was quite popular. The last example that we had in terms of our Checkpoint infrastructure was another one. It's support for our legacy email systems. And I don't know whether Git Enterprise could be considered a legacy email system. I sometimes think so. But essentially, we moved our Git Enterprise solution from our on-premise infrastructure into AWS. And our first thought in terms of Git Enterprise was using Amazon's simple email service, which is a great service, but unfortunately the Git Enterprise solution required SMTP. So our solution was to actually deploy CloudGuard gateways in, again, another TPZ and use those CloudGuard gateways as SMTP relays. That then allowed systems like our Git Enterprise and our SQL Redgate environments to send email traffic out of those backend environments without direct connectivity to the internet. Very, very successful for us. So I think it was this morning again when we watched the keynote and the Checkpoint CIO, I hope I'm getting his title right, but the Checkpoint CIO was talking about people, process, and technology. So, we've deployed quite a lot of technology. We've got, 5,700 servers, and we've got hundreds of Checkpoint gateways, and I've got, sort of 5 key security vendors. But what we found was that you couldn't do technology without people. And for us, culture inside the organization was very, very important because a poor security culture would mean that this security technology would not be ultimately successful. But what we found quite quickly was that the security culture of the security team itself needed to change quite quickly. So we really did that based on 4 key activities. The first one was that we changed the team to be more cross-functional. So that meant that instead of hiring security engineers every time we needed a security resource, we started to hire, architects, developers, DevOps capabilities. We started to build cross-functional teams, which was fantastic and highly successful. Then we started to act like the development teams themselves. We started to build in short, frequent cycles. We started to adopt agile principles. And that led on to the next initiative, which was to increase our communication. So Damon talked about success. So we started to actually celebrate our success. So when we were successful in regards to deploying infrastructure, or even after attending meetings here today at this conference, we'll communicate that information out to our teams. So no longer is security a gated sort of closed shop of information where we're communicating more. And that includes communicating failure. So if we do make a mistake or we have a problem, we communicate in regards to that. But finally, the last initiative around culture is about the idea of building security as a service. If you move into the public cloud and you take your partners, such as Checkpoint, with you, you need to define and build a service. That service needs to define how you, as a security organization, would operate, but then how your partners, such as Checkpoint, will operate alongside you. It's very, very important. There we go. Well, there we go. Second last slide. So I talked about my key principles, and they were the thing that I spoke to my teams and spoke to the rest of the organization about for the last 3 years. But then I say to you, evolve your principles. And that's where I came up with the automated, continuous, and visible principles. But before I talk quickly about those, what I thought I would do is go back to a quote that our head of site reliability actually said to me one day. If you don't put a metric on it, how do you know what normal is? And that's really, really important. Because the first time I ever deployed a Checkpoint vSEC gateway, maybe it wasn't even vSEC back then. It might not have been vSEC, actually. The first time I ever deployed a Checkpoint gateway into AWS, I thought I was pretty special. I thought I did a great job. It was awesome. But that gateway didn't operate anywhere near with the performance or how it was supposed to. And I think even some of the options on that gateway did the complete opposite to what they were supposed to, because it was a new environment. It meant that I needed to relearn my understanding or my knowledge base in regards to that infrastructure, but we had to go back to a principle of visibility and a principle of having metrics. So from then onwards, we started to put metrics on all of our infrastructure in the environment so we could monitor and then optimize the environment. And you talked about Tamir in your last presentation. Tamir actually helped us tune most of the environment for us. When we were building our VPN tunnels, we were having quite a lot of trouble getting the performance we needed because most of the documentation was based on physical infrastructure, and Tamir spent many, many nights, well, days, nights for us, days for him, I think, actually helping us tune our environment. In the end, we were very successful. But what automated, continuous, and visible means is that if things are automated, they can be continuous. And what I believe, and what you should believe as well, is automation and being continuous is consistent, and consistency is secure. That's why security as code is a good principle to stick by. And visible is something that we now completely adhere to inside Xero. Visibility is an operational, and design criteria. If we go to put in new infrastructure, or we enact some of the initiatives we're working with the Checkpoint R&D team on, visibility will be the number one criteria. I think I talked to them for a couple of hours yesterday about visibility, and they probably got sick of hearing me bang on about visibility. It's very, very important. But ultimately, I think Itai was talking about DevOps speed at the end of his presentation. Now Checkpoint's moving with DevOps speed. Well, I would say to you, you don't want to move with DevOps speed, you want to move with DevSecOps speed, right? Because you need to blend development, operations, and security. But even then, forget about the word DevSecOps. Think about being fast or secure, so making a decision about whether your organization is one that is fast or one that's secure, but then make a mindset change to being fast and secure. Because that's the most important thing, because I know that if we weren't fast and secure, I probably wouldn't be standing here talking to you today, because we would have moved on with other technologies. And that's where it's very, very important to work closely with partners such as Checkpoint to build out a fast and secure architecture for your environment. Thank you.
We've even left a couple